a cloud lifted from the mountain where God had just given the Israelites his covenant law. The Israelites began to set out to the desert in their quest to the promised land, a quest that should have taken weeks, maybe months. Let's not forget all that God had done for them. He brought them out of slavery under Pharaoh. He guided them through the Red Sea onto dry land. Then he brought them up to Mount Sinai. And God did something no one could have ever expected. The God of the Hebrew people came down the mountain to his people. He didn't tell them to try harder or work more. He didn't tell them they needed to reach up and impress him, like every other religion communicates. But the God of love left his home up there to come here with us, knowing that our best efforts would never, ever reach him. But the one thing Feder forgot to tell us last week, which we won't hold against him, is that God then stays down here. How cool is that? God doesn't leave and then return. He wants to remain here with us, his kids. A good dad wants to remain here with us. He wants to spend time with us. The question is, if God is down here and staying, where is he going to be? Where will the God of the universe reside here on earth? Where will we find him? Well, God instructs Moses clearly to build a tabernacle, which is basically a portable tent that will need to be moved from place to place. But this tent will be the heart of worship and the reminder that God never leaves us. He never forsakes us, that he wants us. Do you see the gospel thread here? Yet again, God coming from heaven to earth, staying here with a portable place designed for worship. Hint, that is you and that is me because of Jesus, the innocent atoning sacrifice of sin. Surely, after seeing all of these miracles God had done and him ascending down here to dwell with his people, they would be thankful, indebted, and trust this most powerful and loving God. But in the midst of all that God had done for them, they began to complain. If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. The big kicker in all of this is, what they are saying is they were better off without God. They would have been better off back in Egypt in slavery. God should have just left them there. This manna they spoke of was edible, and although it wasn't the most delightful thing to eat, it was food, and it could be used for different variations. So the Lord became angry. I wonder why. In the midst of this, we see Moses also take his turn at complaining. He said, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you would put the burden of all of these people on me? Did I conceive these people? Did I give birth to them? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors?" So what does God do? He promises to give them exactly what they wanted. You want meat? I'll give you meat. So much meat that it will be coming out of your nostrils. And that seems painful to me. But then, after God promises this, Moses says, hey God, are you sure we're going to have enough food here for everybody? And as if God needs Moses' counsel on how much food to give his people. So God sends them quail. Lots and lots and lots of quail, because that's what they asked for. But God was angry because of their lack of faith. So he struck them with a plague. Now you would think after all of these things that the Israelites would have gotten the point that God is in control. But no. Again, they start to complain. Even Moses' brother and sister questioned God and Moses' leadership. And there were more consequences due to their lack of faith. Then they arrive in Canaan. Canaan is the place where God said it would be their land. It was fertile. It was the land flowing with milk and honey. You would think that God brought them this far, that they would know that and figure out that he was taking care of them. So at God's request, Moses sends out some men to explore the land. They came back with a report that sure, the land was exactly what God said it was going to be. It was flowing with milk and honey. It was fertile. They even brought back fruit from the land. But they said the people there were powerful and large. They didn't know if they could conquer them. So Caleb stood up from the rest of them, trying to silence the others that had gone to explore. He said, they can overtake them. But the other men spread such a bad report and attitude, saying, we can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are. They continued complaining about how these people were going to devour them. And again went as far as to say they would have been better off dying back in Egypt. Here they are at the border. They're right across from the promised land. The land that they didn't just walk through on their own, but God walked through it with them. And they're saying they would rather have just gone back to Egypt. To me, that's a slap in the face. God gets upset and wants to send a plague to them. I can't say I blame them, but after a plea from Moses, God spares them once again and forgives them. But there are consequences. God does not allow that generation into the promised land. In fact, Moses and Aaron die before entering the promised land. A trip that could have taken weeks ended up lasting 40 years. Moses, in his last days, went up to Moab. The Lord showed Moses the promised land, but from a distance. Here, Moses walks through this whole process with the Israelites, but yet he is not allowed to cross. 40 years. So God tells Moses that in his last moments that he would give his descendants the land that he had promised. But then Moses died just outside the promised land. So here we are many, 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 many years later. And the question I had was, has anything changed? Has mankind learned from this story? I mean, reading this, I'm like, what is wrong with these people? How many times does God have to show up? But then I look in the mirror and I reflect on my story and really try to see myself in God's story to the Israelites. I'm reminded of my doubt when my grandmother, who I was so close to, passed away. And weeks later, my parents' marriage fell apart. I'm reminded of the loneliness I felt when all my friends were getting married and having children, and I felt so alone. I remember wondering at some points whether I had to make the choice of feeding my dog or feeding myself because of my financial situations and decisions. I'm reminded of freaking out when I didn't know how I was going to provide for my family because it wasn't just me, it was my wife and baby. These were my times in the wilderness, and I could sit here all day long and reminisce about others. How did I respond in the wilderness? How did God respond? Did he let me go? Or did he do what he had promised to me, to never leave me nor forsake me? I would make a bold claim that at some point in our lives, in all of our lives here, that we've all felt like we're in the wilderness. Maybe you are a single parent. Man, do I have a lot of respect for you. You are trying to make ends meet, working maybe more than one job, caring for 1, 2, or maybe even more children, trying to give them spiritual guidance, and also trying to care for yourself. You are tired and weary, and your prayer is, God, just help me. If only you would provide help to me. Maybe you are here, and like me, you were single, or you are single now, and all you want is to be loved by someone. You want to experience things not just on your own, but with somebody and share those experiences with them. And you're sick and tired of doing things on your own. You pray, God, just help me not to be so lonely. If only you would send someone to me. Maybe you are here and you have something medically that you are battling with, and you pray every day, God, deliver me from this. Or maybe a loved one or a friend or a relative is sick, and your prayer is, God, would you heal them? Maybe you are a parent and you walk by a picture of a cute little 10-year-old boy or girl every day displayed on the wall. Now they are 18 and say, I'm 18 years old. I'm going to do whatever I want. You can't tell me what to do. And you wonder today, sitting here, where that little boy or girl is. Are they safe? Will they ever come home? Because they've either walked away from you or even worse, walked away from God. And they're off doing their own thing. Maybe they're partying and involved in drugs, and your prayer is, God, bring them home. Maybe you have a job that you absolutely despise. God, get me out of here. Maybe you have a marriage that is in disarray. God, help me live through one more day. These situations are tough. We have all been there. Oftentimes we cry out, God, why am I here? And like the Israelites, we might even look back and say, if only I could go back to a time that it was easier. But if we look at the big picture of Moses and the Israelites and God's greater picture, it can help us give perspective into the why. So God took them out of Egypt. Why? Because he wanted to make a great nation, a nation set apart, a nation that would be blessed for generations to come. Were they ready to be that nation? Looking at their story, I don't think so. All I see is a bunch of whiners and complainers. It kind of reminds me of me. A difficult thing comes my way. Something slams me in the face. Do I freak out? Yup. Do I question God? Sometimes. So what do we do when we are in the wilderness? In all of these things, do we complain? Do we doubt? Do we try to control? Do we cry out asking God, what are we to do? Well, today, as we reflect on the story of Moses, let's try to see if there's anything we can learn from this story. The whole point of this series is to place ourselves in the story and see if we can match our story with God's story. The very first thing we can do in the midst of being in the wilderness is that we can look back on what God has done for us. Sure, the Israelites looked back, but their focus was more on their loss than it was what God had done. They didn't remember what God had done for them. They were too focused on themselves to see God's provisions. One of the most practical things I think about is when we pray for something. Then it comes true, then we worry or complain about the very thing we asked for and forget about what God has done for us. For me, I so badly wanted to get married and have a child. For years, I begged God, please just let me have the opportunity to love someone like you have loved me. Funny thing is, I pleaded with God for probably at least 5 years that I would get married before I was 30. Well, 3 months before my 30th birthday, guess what? With tears in my eyes as I stood right down here, my bride walked down the aisle with her father. In January of that following year, guess what happened? We found out that we were going to be parents for the first time. Now remember, I begged God for a wife and a family. So what happens next? What happens after all the initial excitement wore off? I freaked out. Anxiety came in. What am I going to do? What are we going to do? Am I going to have to work all these extra jobs and not ever see my family? Who is going to watch our son? What happened? I forgot what God had done. Sure enough, I know we can all be surprised. My wife and I are still here. And she works, she continues to work, and I work too. Here I am today. God orchestrated in such a way that Samson is being cared for during the day by a family friend who loves him and cares about him. He is super excited to go every day. God provided. Surprise, surprise. The funny thing is that God had provided so much for me and my wife up until that point. He answered my prayer for a wife and a family. If only I had looked back on those blessings God had already done for me, I would dare say I would not have spent so much time wandering around, whining, complaining, and worrying. When we are in the wilderness, we need to remember to look back on what God has done for us. The second thing we need to do is be in community. Now, if there's one thing you have heard many times, even if last week was your first week, is that we encourage everyone to be in community. So looking back at Moses and God's interactions, we see that Moses is upset. This is too much for him to do on his own. So what does he do? He asks God what to do. Then the Lord says to Moses, "Bring me 70 of Israelites' elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting, that they may stand here with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. They will share the burden of the people with you." Catch this. "So that you will not have to carry it alone." We don't have to carry the burden on our own. One of the things I often tend to think is that we are okay sticking to ourselves, that we don't need anybody, especially when things are going okay in our lives. We go through the motions of life. We come to church, we sit here and worship and listen to a message. We have some conversations out in the foyer, answer some questions about jobs, spouses, kids, grandkids, but within a very short, less than 5-minute interactions. And then we go home and we live our life. And we do this again and again and again. Life is good, though. We don't need anything more. Then something happens. Something is tragic. Something tragic happens. And what do? We wonder where people are. The problem is, no one is there, because we have not invested in community with others. No one is there to carry our burdens with us, because no one even knows us or the things we are facing. We all need community. I am in a group of guys that live life with me. Yes, I have a group that meets weekly. We are actually walking through this series together. But even more than walking through this series together, we are walking through life together in biblical community. Don't try to walk through life alone. Yes, it is great to have a spouse to talk to and to walk with. It's great to have family members to walk with through life. But there is something beautiful about guys meeting with guys and girls meeting with girls who can talk through life together, lift each other up when they have fallen, and learn about God's story and how his story is our story. Don't miss out on these life transformational relationships. Maybe there are people that you are interacting with out in the foyer that you could rally together for one of these groups. If you need help getting into one of these communities, pull out your communication card at any point and check the box, interested in a disciple maker group. So look back on what God has done for us. Be in community. And lastly, focus on the cross. Pastor Jeff Vines says it this way: at the very beginning of the Bible, there is the tree of life. It is beautiful. And then in the final book of the Bible, Revelations, you see the tree of life again. It is the entryway into God's promised land. So what the Bible communicates is that all life is between these two trees. Between the tree of life, where all life begins, and the tree of life, where real life begins, eternity. But there is one more tree, the tree of the cross. And God puts that right in the middle of the other two trees. He puts it there to show us that even though there are hard times, that there are times of great sadness, great loss, great pain, and even out of the chaos, God brings life. He sent his son to die on the cross, made from a tree, because he wanted to dwell in us. The reality is, We are all living in the wilderness. It may look different in different stages of life for different people, but we will continue to live here until we get to the promised land. That is why 1 Peter, it says, not to be surprised by hard times. But in the middle of the mess, God sends his son to die so that we can be transformed and have a way to get to the promised land. But why do we have to live here? Because God is preparing us. He is getting us ready for his promised land. So what do we do while we are in the wilderness? We look back on what God has done. We remember his faithfulness. Like the Israelites, he brought us out of slavery to sin. We need to be in community. Don't try to do this life alone. There will be trials. Don't walk through them alone. Get yourself plugged into community with others. Invest in them and let others invest in you. And lastly, focus on the cross, the tree that gives us hope, the tree that is producing life in the middle of the desert, the tree that was the demonstration of the ultimate sacrifice and love so that God himself could dwell within us. It sure isn't easy to live here. Yes, we have great days, some days of celebration. Then there are days of sadness, hurt, pain, and death. What are we going to do with those days? Will we walk away from God? Will we question his goodness? Or will we allow these situations to make a transformational impact on our lives and the lives of the people around us? People are watching, and you never know how God might be using what you are going through to draw them closer to him. Will you be faithful? If you open up your hands and ask, God will provide. God, thank you for today. Thank you for your story and just the demonstration you show, the grace that you show to the Israelites. And that is the same grace that you show us, knowing there's times where we're going through difficult situations and we don't always look up to you. We don't always look at the past and what you've done for us. But God, that you're still faithful, that you still have grace, and that you still have a heart for your children. And God, I just pray that as whatever we're going through here in this room, whether have good days or bad days today, that God, you would just guide us through those, that you would help us to look towards you for guidance, that we wouldn't just quickly question or doubt you, God, but that we would draw close to you in those times. I thank you for your word, and I thank you for who you are and what you've done for us. In your name I pray. Amen.